the next example I want to get into is reduce. Reduce is another kind of functional thing, but it's not necessarily intuitive. So we've all done this type of stuff where I want to determine like the cumulative age of all the people. Right? So I set up a variable cumulative age equal to 0. And then I loop through the collection of people. So I have some kind of for loop for person in self.people. And then my code would be cumulative age plus equals person.age. And then at the end of this, we should be able to then figure out what the cumulative age is. Right? And anytime we're like totaling something up, so our cumulative age is 385 for all of our people. How many times have you done that? Create some total and increment the total as you iterate through a collection all the time, right? Like I mean, it's constant. You're not necessarily caring about like how old, like the cumulative age doesn't make sense, but maybe you want to total up all the net pay of all your paychecks so you figure out your net pay for the year. Right? We're kind of coming to that season, or your gross pay, or whatever, right? Like, yeah. Okay, so cumulative age is a bad example, but that's the data set that we have, right? So, like this problem comes up all the time. Like I have some kind of incrementer, and I want to figure out what the cumulative result is. Okay, so that's what map solves. This problem. Or I'm sorry, reduce. So I take a collection of data, I take a collection of people, or I take a collection of line items, or a collection of students, and I boil it down to a single scalar value, like one value. Like what's the result of that? What's the total? Okay, so let's do that with our people. I want to do this same exact thing. I want to figure out what the cumulative age is. So I'm going to take self.people, self.people.reduce, and this looks a little bit different. You'll notice there's an initial result and then the next partial result and person, all that kind of stuff. So it's more complicated than other methods, other closure methods. So the way the reduce works is it actually takes two parameters. It takes an initial value of your accumulator, like our total, our cumulative age. So it takes an initial value of that total, and then it also takes a closure that then updates that total. So our initial value is going to be 0. Right? We're starting the age at 0 and we want to increment. And then the second parameter that takes is a closure. So I could pass it in like 0 and my closure. But since I'm ending with a closure, I can say 0 and my closure. Okay, and again, like this is just syntactically, it's okay, but we don't have to worry about it. Like just let's write a closure. So my initial value is 0, and I want to accumulate that initial value. Okay? So our closure is going to have two parameters. One is going to be the total age, or cumulative age. I'll call it total age, just to be different here. I can type it. And then the second parameter is going to be a person. my return value is going to be an int. And then I need a function body. The syntax is a little messy, right? I don't know. It looks a little messy to me. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to increment total age. So I'm going to take the total age plus the person's age. And I don't know that I actually need a return. Yeah, I do. Actually, I don't need a return because there's just a single line. So if I put the return here, it's fine. But if I don't put the return there, it's also fine. Okay, so then it's saying the result is unused. So let's create a variable, age of all people. And let's just verify that we get the same result. Right? So we know that it should be 385. So if I go ahead and run this now, my reduce is going to give me the same exact result. Let's say I wanted to start at 100 instead. So instead of starting my total at 0, I start at 100. Maybe I seed some 401k with $100 or something like that, and I want to increment it based on the result. So I have an initial value, and then my closure is going to take 2 parameters. How do I refer to that initial value? And then secondarily, my second parameter being, what am I going to do with this person? Okay? Or what am I going to call like that current instance as I'm iterating through the collection? We can simplify this thing, right? So first things first, I really don't need these variables, right? Like I don't need to name my variables. I know that I'm going to have 2 incoming parameters. We know what they're for, right? The first one is for the age, and then the second one is for the object as I'm iterating through the collection. So if I get rid of the age and just call that $0, positionally that's the first parameter, and then positionally this is going to be my second parameter. Then I no longer need the names of the parameters. Not necessary. The return value is optional because I'm adding integers to initial results. And since I only have 1 line of code, like it really comes down to something that looks like this, where I don't need a return value either because I only have 1 line of code. It'll infer the return. Well, that looks a lot simpler, right? And I say it looks a lot simpler knowing where we came from. So we went to a single line of code, but like if I look at that, so, and again, this is just like the space that I'm in. When I look at this, this is not readable to me. So if it's not readable to you, like that's not surprising to me. Like we kind of have to unpack everything that's going on there. We know that we have an initial value with our reduce. Our reduce statement takes an initial value. Like where do we want to start our accumulator? Most likely I want to start it at 0. And then parameter 0 is that accumulator, like that total. And I'm saying I want to increment the total by the age of each person. Like that's how it reads. So a lot of this has to do with the fact that I need to know what reduce is actually doing. Like if I don't know what reduce is doing, then this code doesn't make any sense at all, right?
Wasn't part of the point of Swift to write readable code? So I mean the way they define the functions and the way the IntelliSense pops up.
Yeah.
This kind of seems to go against that.
I think the argument of that is that once you're used to coding, it is readable.
Yeah, and I think
That's kind of like, for me, it's super confusing, but I don't know.
And I think a lot of that has to do with like I think the readability issues has to do with syntax.
Yeah, no doubt.
So let's get over the syntax, because the syntax is a little bit wonky, right? Like, so if we get over the fact that the syntax is like, there's a lot of things that are going on for us, then I think it becomes readable, like you're saying. Like the readability, it's kind of, I've made this statement a couple of times, and I get pushback a lot because I teach here at MATC, and some of the students are, 2-year degree students that haven't programmed in the real world at all. But I feel like the documentation that's required in some of the classes here is ridiculous. Like, I don't need to comment the fact that I'm adding 2 numbers together. Like, I can read the code. The plus sign is doing addition here. It's kind of a base level of like, don't touch this code if you can't understand like the basic syntax of the language. Like, I don't need to comment on the basic syntax of the language, right? Like, it's assumed that you would know that. Like, where I'll comment is, hey, I'm doing something strange here. Like, otherwise you should be able to read my code. And if you can't read the code, then you probably shouldn't be touching the code. But I'll comment, like, if something's strange, like, then I'm going to make note of that and let you know, like, here's what's going on with this. This is why it's done this way. This is why I'm doing it that way. So, like, part of me thinks this is just, like, syntax that we're jumping over, and, like, the syntax is messy. So, like, coding styles and coding standards, I feel like sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's more work than it's worth. And I know different people have different views on that, but I'm sorry if you can't distinguish a plus from concatenation and addition. Like, I can't spell it out for you, right? Or like in the JavaScript class, the first semester JavaScript class, I think students are taught never use the double equal sign, always use the triple equal sign. Well, what if I want to take advantage of the fact that JavaScript will do that type conversion for me, and it'll just do a non-type comparison? And I know the language well enough that that's what I want to do. Like, do I really have to go the extra step and convert the type when I don't want to? The language would have done it for me. And if I knew the language well enough, it would do it for me. It would reduce the amount of code I had to type. Doesn't it make sense to use the double equal sign for the comparison? Like, and then do I have to comment like, oh, JavaScript is going to do a type conversion for me here? I don't think that's necessary. So, like, don't limit yourself, right? Like, if the language will do it, then use it. It used to be, like, when I went to school, that ternary operator was there, and instructors were like, don't use that. It makes your code hard to read. Well, it's 1 line of code versus 4 lines of code. So it might be harder to read, but it's more concise. So, and there's less code to screw up. And that's another big push with Swift, is like the actual line number count of lines of code. Like, let's reduce it. The more lines of code, the more things you can screw up. So I think it's readability and conciseness. Okay. Yeah, reduce is a strange one. Like, reduce I almost think of as like a ancillary to filter, but it's not. Yeah, so you're reducing it down to just a single value. Like a collection down to a single value. So, like, in that sense it makes sense, but like, it's not intuitive like filter, right? Like that I wouldn't. Yeah, if I was talking to my wife, who's a non-programmer, and I told her that I'm going to use the reduce function, it wouldn't necessarily, like, it wouldn't match the expectations, right? Like, in terms of like the English language. So it doesn't. Okay. Okay, so finally we get to what happens when we have, let's do this outside of our view did load. Let's say I have a function and I want some function with a closure. And my function is going to take a closure as a parameter. So think of this like a callback. Like, hey, what should happen when we're done with getting our response from a service? I made a call out to an API. I'm going to get some data back from that API, and this is the function that I want to execute at the end of this. Okay, so I'm going to pass in a closure. This closure is going to take no parameters and return void. So what I'm really saying here is closure is a function definition. So what I'm getting passed into some function with a closure is I'm getting a function definition passed in. And at that point, I can choose to execute that function. I have a variable that's incoming, that's a function definition, and now I'm executing the function. That's the beginning and ending parentheses. Same concept as JavaScript. I can refer to the variable, which is a function definition, but then if I put beginning and ending parentheses at the end, now I'm executing that function definition. Does that make sense? Kind of? I know not all of you have had like any advanced JavaScript, so like this may be the first time you're seeing it, but functions kind of have duality in Swift and in JavaScript. So I could have a function that's literally just the function definition, or I could have a function that's in the process of being executed. The only difference is whether I have beginning or ending parentheses there. So if I just use the name, I'm talking about the function definition. If I put the name with the beginning and ending parentheses, I'm talking about let's execute that function at this point. Okay, so the parameter that's incoming is the function definition. Like that's the variable that's pointing at a function definition. And then line 34, we're using the duality of that function. Now we're executing it. Okay, so it doesn't matter what that function is, as long as it doesn't take any parameters and it returns void. Okay, so I might say, here's another function. Print welcome message. That's my function. No parameters, returns void, and I'm just going to print hello world. See how this function signature matches the closure function signature? So then in our view did load, and I'm just going right underneath the super view did load so that we can see kind of everything all together. If I scrolled down, then we wouldn't be able to see like our function that takes closure as a parameter in our welcome message. So what I can do is I can invoke some function with a closure, and like it's expecting me to pass in a closure, and I can do that, but I could also pass in print welcome message. Yeah. Now, like this doesn't make a ton of sense here, right? Like this is more like syntax and like the hurdle of the syntax. But if I run this right now, you'll see the first thing that ends up happening is it prints our welcome message, hello world. That'll be the first thing that gets output down here. But it's not print welcome message that's doing it until we call, like you'll notice I never really call print welcome message. That is never called. Like I don't say print welcome message beginning and ending parentheses. I pass in the function definition, and then some function with this closure actually executes it as a closure. Okay, so then we might take this some function with a closure. You'll notice the syntax is a little bit goofy again. So it wants a closure, and it's saying that's the only parameter. So Swift guided me to the fact that, hey, you don't have to implement all that stuff. Like you can just pass in this closure as the beginning and ending curly braces. And then I can put my closure definition right here. So I could say, here print this inline closure. So now I'm passing in what would be considered an anonymous function. Like I'm passing in that closure, an anonymous function that just prints out this inline closure. So because this sum function with a closure takes a function definition as a parameter, the function definition has to match a certain signature. It takes no parameters, returns void. I can use an existing function that already exists that matches that method signature, or I can create a closure function definition, so an anonymous function, so to speak, and it'll take that as a parameter as well.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding this right. You're essentially saying that it takes the code inside what we're passing in, and it assigns that almost like to a variable called closure, and then we call on closure as a method to run that code.
That's exactly what's going on. Yep. So where this will come in most of the time is, again, we're leading up to this. We make a web request out to an API, we get some data back, and then I want to execute some function with that data. So my function with a closure, my closure is actually going to take an incoming parameter, which is my data that's coming back from my service. And then I want to do something with that data. That's my callback. Right? So like it's not intuitive tonight, right? Like this is like, oh yeah, this syntax is really bizarre. And you can do some cool stuff, but like I don't know that I'm ever going to use it. Where you use it is with callbacks. So callbacks, I think most people can like recognize like, hey, go get me that data, and then when it comes back, I want you to do this with the data. Right? Like the example I use in my Ajax class is if I asked one of you to go across the street and go into my mailbox and grab my mail, because I never go across the street to grab my mail. It's all junk mail and like book offers and stuff like that. So it's probably been like 3 years since I've checked my mailbox. Okay, so I want you to go get that mail for me. I'm going to give you my mailbox combination and bring it back. Well, it's not going to happen instantaneously. Like I could ask any one of you. It's going to take some time to walk across the street, go to the mailbox, like punch in the combo, bring the mail back. And then you're going to bring back the mail. That's the result, right? That's my ancillary to like an API request. I asked you to do something, and you're going to bring it back to me. You have no idea what I'm going to do with it. Like I'm going to take the data package that you bring back, my mail, and I'm going to throw it in the trash because it's all garbage. Like that's what's going to happen. That's my callback. So when you do get back, I'm going to take it in my hands, I'm going to walk over to the trash and throw it away. Like that's my callback function. Okay? But I have to sit and wait. Like I can't just, like I'm not going to go stand by the door with my hands out and sit there and wait and everything else is on pause. When you get the mail, then I walk over and throw it away. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like we'll continue to conduct class. When you do get back, let me know. I'll take the data that you got back and go over to the trash and throw it away. Like so that's what's happening with our APIs. Same thing's happening here. Like this is what it ultimately ends up looking like. I need to wait for my data, and then I'm going to pass some function definition to say, hey, when you do get the data back, this is what I want you to execute. This is the code that should execute when you come back with the result. That's what this closure is. So what you pass in is a closure. Okay, so like to kind of give you a better example of this, let's say our closure did take an incoming parameter like a data package. Okay, so here's a func, some func with closure with data. Okay, and kind of a better example of that is with a parameter. Okay, so I want to write a function that takes a closure, and my closure has to have an incoming parameter. So here's my closure. It's going to take an incoming parameter, which is data. I'm just calling it, I'm just naming it. And it doesn't have a return. And all I'm going to do is call that function passing in the data. Use of undeclared type data. Sorry, I need a type, not a name. So my data is going to come across as a string. I want to name this. There we go. Yes, I can have types. Whoops. Let me just execute closure. So I have an incoming parameter, missing argument, parameter number 1 in call. I think I just need $0. Anonymous closure argument not contained in a closure. I screwed this up. Like I again, syntactically, what's wrong with this? So, like I just want to debug this with you. And I think you should be able to see this in terms of what's wrong. Okay? And like I want to give you a hint. So if I'm looking at this, this would appear to be the end of things, right? Like this is the beginning parenthesis. Here's the ending parenthesis. Like I would argue that I'm done. Yeah, so my closure really, like my function, like the parameter is a function definition, which is a closure. So it's a string that returns a void inside that closure. Why am I getting that stupid error?
You don't have a closing thread. You have one before closure, and then you have to set around string. You don't have a closing one. That's all you do there at the end.
Yeah. Expected parameter name followed by colon. I don't think I need that comma. So my closure is going to take a string, it's going to return a void, and then here's my function definition. So this is my incoming parameter, here's my function definition. Let's come back to that. Okay, so I want to call that method. So I want to call some func with closure with parameters. And then here's my closure definition. Like it's going to take a string. And I just hit enter there. And Swift is going to kind of guide me through some of the syntax. So let me back up a second. So my function that takes a closure with that has parameters as incoming parameters, you'll see that it says, hey, I want a closure. It's a string that returns a void. I'm just going to hit enter to that. It's highlighted. Whoops. So I just hit enter to it, and it said, what is your string? So my string is going to be year is my data packet. And then here's my function definition. So my function definition, contextual type string, returning void. Oh, sorry. This is my parameter name. All I'm going to do is print this message. I don't know that I want to do that. The syntax sucks. Sorry. Like I'm just so used to just creating my callback function in line and not having this secondary function to make it like a decent demo. This is where I would end up passing in a variable. So like I'd have my message being closure syntax is sometimes confusing. And then I could execute my closure with my message. So what I want to do is I want to call some function with my closure. I think that that's close. Some function with params, print the message. I don't think this is going to execute. I lied. I didn't think it was going to execute. But so my closure function, I get passed a closure that takes an incoming string and it returns void. So I'm having a difficult time explaining this, like out of context without like our data package. So the way I would describe this is I know that I'm going to get a data result back and I want to then do something with my data result. Like right here is where I define my result. And this function, this callback, is what's implemented for you automatically with your data requests. I don't know that this is a good way to stop or not, but it's probably not because you're probably more confused than anything else. And I'll be honest with you. I was going through it and I'm like, I don't know if I should show these functions with closures that get passed in because like you don't necessarily have to write them. Like they're built into the library. So like when I make a data request, it takes a closure that takes data as a parameter. You're not writing the initial function. So I think that like it causes more confusion to have to write both sides of that equation. And that's what we're running into here. So the first one's pretty easy when I don't take any incoming parameters and it just the return is void. I just execute the function call. Like same thing kind of happens, but not really. Okay. So I apologize for that. Let's end on a better note. Let's handle one more kind of built-in function. This is Swift specific. Let's say I want to know if someone's email address is Mac. So if their email address contains mac.com. Okay? Like that'd be pretty hard to filter out. So what I can do is I can say all Mac users equal to self.people.contains. And then this is going to take a closure. So what I really want to do, let's just kind of jump right into the closure syntax. Let's see if we can actually get this to work. I'm going to use position 0. I'm going to look at the email. And I'm going to say contains. And then mac.com. Let's print all of our Mac users. Okay, so we should get Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Maybe. Is that what I...
One of them found it.
No, I don't think that should be. Way to go out in style, right? Nothing working here at the end. We got through a little while.
This is like that every time we try to do this.
Filtering and not searching for contains.
No, so I want to use contains. So contains will take closure as an argument, and I can so I could use filter as well. It's very similar. That contains. I don't think I should get true. Swift. I lied. Returns a Boolean indicating whether the sequence contains an element. I thought it returned all of them. This is just a true or false value. Like if I'm doing a search, does it exist? Does it exist somewhere? I thought it would give me all of them. So yeah, if I wanted just that, then I can use filter. Then I should get Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. I thought contains did the same thing, but it allowed me to do a deeper search. And it does allow me to do a deeper search, but it's not the result that I was expecting in that case. So it'll allow me to do a deeper search passing in a closure. So I can say, oh, based on this object's property, X, Y, and Z, I can run whatever function I want and see if it contains that. But that wasn't the result that I was expecting. Just the true or false value.
You can link multiple closures together depending on how you want to do it.
Yeah, so I could do filter and then reduce to find out the age of all the Apple people. Yeah, I can chain them together. Absolutely. Typically, you don't. You take all Mac users and then do reduce. So I'm not chaining them together just for readability, but you can. I'm going to leave it as filter because we'll end on a good note there. So next week we're going to go through, so if you're kind of reading ahead, I think the next chapter will make some sense. We're going to look at the astronomy image of the day, that service. We could use the weather service that I'm using from Ajax too. So you're probably going to have to sign up for both of those services. So if you want to get ahead of that, the astronomy image of the day service, like if I just search for astronomy image of the day, there's a service that you can sign up for. The other one, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, that we used for Ajax to get the weather. I can't remember what it is, just off the top of my head, but there's a weather API where we basically pass in a zip code and get back latitude and longitude coordinates, and then based on those latitude and longitude coordinates, we can get weather information based on whatever weather service is closest. We're going to use those two services next week to look at how do we deal with data coming back and how do we implement that in iOS. Okay? Yeah.
Can I just use my own APIs?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Like, I just don't know that they're, like, I don't know the functionality of them, so, like, coming into class, we'll use the two APIs that are out on the internet and everyone can use.
For the projects and stuff like that. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've got 12 of them sitting right here.
So yeah, that's the plan is going forward is we'll look at making web requests out to data. Okay, so next week we'll just look at reading data, and then we'll talk about like how do I actually send data to those services, how do I package up the data and all of that stuff. Okay, so next week we're really just talking about the GET requests, and then after that we'll kind of go forward from there. Okay, I don't have a lab for you tonight. I would suggest trying some of this stuff because like syntactically it's like, oh yeah, it looks okay. Just try to run it. Like create a collection and see like line items and see if you can come up with a total for an order, right? Like, so that's an example. I don't have a project or an assignment for you. The idea was that if you had some time to work on your projects, you could get your projects done. Projects are due, I think it's tonight, right? Like I always confuse the nights between the JavaScript class and this class, but like I think I made everything due on Tuesday nights. So it's tonight. So if you have project questions and you're stuck, stay and get help. Like I'm guessing you could work through it all even if you haven't started, but I think it's probably a little late. But if you have things that you want to wrap up.